Hello, everybody, and welcome to the IOCDS Research Roundtable, the IOCDF live stream where we pick an interesting topic within the OCD literature and discuss it with the people who know it the best. My name is Kyle King. I'm your host today. I'm a rising second-year med student now at the Yale School of Medicine, and I've spent most of my time most of my scientific time thinking and studying OCD because I think it's really interesting and also because I have it. So a lot of the things that I research and a lot of things that we talk about on the show are really relevant to me in my personal life. Normally, I'm joined by my co-host, Jonathan Abramowitz. I don't know what John is doing this time. Normally, I have an excuse like he's on vacation, but I think he's just doing whatever. But good for John. You know, he deserves a little bit of a break. But we have more than enough people on the show today to make up for John's absence. And today we're going to be talking about what my parents ask me about almost every dinner, and they still don't seem to exactly understand what I'm saying. We're talking about AI. And there's a number of things that I want to hit on, and there's a number of perspectives that I want to get from all of our guests here today. But before we dig too much into the actual subject matter, I do have a couple announcements that I need to make. First, this live stream is educational and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please work with your provider or contact a local clinician, and you can use the IOCDS online resource directory at iocdf.org/find-help to locate a trained clinician near you. Also, the IOCDF is not a crisis hotline. If you're in a crisis or if you're ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. You can also access this online at www.988lifeline.org or go to your local emergency room or call 911. Lastly, there is a chat feature. I love it when you guys put chats and comments in there. And if you put questions in, we'll try to get to it throughout the show. Just know that everything you put in that is going to live on the internet forever. We never really have a problem. I just like to say at the beginning of every show to be mindful of what's written in that space. Okay, I think that's enough out of my mouth, except for every introduction. So I guess I'll start introducing the guests. The first bio that I have up here is for Kevin Jin. Kevin is a rising third-year PhD student in computational biology and biomedical informatics at Yale University. Go Yale. His research interests concentrate on digital psychiatry, improving our characterization of mental disorders with wearable devices and large language models. And he completed his bachelor's degree in molecular and cellular biology at Johns Hopkins University. Kevin, I was told backstage that we only have 15 seconds for a quick intro. So I'm going to ask you the easiest, quickest, silliest question I can. Favorite ice cream flavor? Go.
Oh, God. Chocolate.
Okay. My next guest, or the bio that I have here, is Dr. Greg Muller. Dr. Greg Muller is a licensed psychologist and assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin. Apart from his clinical and teaching roles, Dr. Muller works on the NIH-funded projects that trains Ukrainian clinicians in evidence-based interventions for PTSD. He also participates as a study therapist on active clinical trials examining the impact of psychedelic-assisted therapy. Dr. Muller, same question to you. Favorite ice cream flavor?
Mint chocolate chip, easy.
Okay, like Kevin, but a little more nuanced. The next bio I got here is Ji-Young Kim, who's in the screen with Carolyn over there on my screen. Ji-Young is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Stanford School of Medicine as a clinical research informaticist. Wow, I've never seen that word before. Ji-Young leverages large language models and natural language processing to identify early signs and symptoms for timely diagnosis and intervention by analyzing electronic health records and patient reporting health data. Ji-Young, ice cream.
Cookies and cream.
Okay. We got a chocolatey group here so far. I guess cookies and cream is kind of vanilla-y, now that I think about it. You know what? I recant my earlier statement. Our fourth guest is Dr. Erica Nurmi, MD, PhD, who is a clinical or child and adolescent and adult psychiatrist specializing in anxiety and OCD spectrum disorders. As an associate professor of psychiatry at UCLA and anxiety section chief at the LAVA, she directs medical training and research. Clinically, she's the medical director of Compass Therapy and the medical director and anxiety OCD clinical director of the Community West Intensive Treatment Program in LA. You're trying to trip me up here with this bio. Her most recent interest is leveraging AI to enhance her research, teaching, and clinical practice. Erica, I feel like you've had too much time to think about your ice cream flavor. I'm switching the question on you. What's your most visited website?
ChatGPT. No, I'm kidding. Okay.
I'll take that answer.
Is it a website? I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? I'm running with it. I like that. Second to last guest, Dr. Brian Zabosky. I always just don't love introducing Brian. For everyone
Nice, Kyle.
Brian has been my mentor for like 5 years, so I really like to make fun of him, and it's going to be really hard not to make fun of him consistently. But anyway, Dr. Brian Zabosky is a board-certified psychologist and an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Yale University. He also serves as the associate director for clinical psychology at the Yale OCD Research Clinic. Dr. Zabosky leads the Artificial Intelligence Special Interest Group for the IOCDF, and his work in this area includes projects that use machine and deep learning to diagnose and predict treatment outcomes in individuals with OCD. Brian, similar question goes out to you. Who's your favorite person that you've ever mentored in your career?
I think that'd be you, Kyle.
Oh, stop it. And our final guest is Dr. Caroline Rodriguez, who is the director of the Stanford OCD Research Program and co-director of the AI for Mental Health Initiative in the Department of Psychiatry of Stanford University. She's also a professor and associate dean in the Stanford School of Medicine and a member of the Scientific and Clinical Advisory Board of the IOCDF. Carolyn, what's your most visited website?
My most visited website, I think, would be it's a little geeky, but it's Lane Library, like where I look up papers and stuff at Stanford.
I'm unfamiliar.
But my favorite host of IOCDF podcast is you, Kyle King. And I really like warm chocolate chip cookies too. Just gonna throw that out there.
Okay. You just wanted to make sure you hit every question there really quick. Well, I think that was the most I've said in 7 minutes in my entire life. I hope it was comprehensible to everyone watching. But now let's talk about AI. Let's talk about Erica's favorite website. So when I pitched this topic to Boris and said, let's talk about OCD and AI, I feel like when you say the word AI, everyone kind of jumps to ChatGPT and generative AI models. But from reading papers that were written by Brian and Greg, I know that that's not the only thing that AI might refer to. So really briefly, to kind of level set here, I wanted to throw out there, maybe Kevin, I'm going to ask you first. Get ready. What is artificial intelligence? When I use that term, what falls under that umbrella?
I would say that artificial intelligence encompasses a broad swathe of technologies that are all designed to emulate human intelligence. The idea behind humans reasoning, thinking, and solving problems for a long time, for over maybe for close to a century, or maybe more than a century, humans have tried to make machines that can think. And solve problems just like us. And so far, I would say the current boom in AI is centering around chatbots, software that you can talk to and it can converse back to you, that can produce really, really human-like responses, scarily human-like responses, in fact. And I think the release of ChatGPT a couple of years ago, one of the first chatbots that can actually be indistinguishable from a human is really catalyzing the current boom in AI. And a lot of companies are trying to emulate what OpenAI has done in releasing ChatGPT and repurposing it to many, many different applications, including medicine and psychiatry.
Mm-hmm. And Brian, I know from your work that you looked at kind of deep learning and machine learning models. So what are those? Because I also want to get to those at some point in this conversation.
Yeah, that actually dovetails nicely with Kevin's answer, which I think was really good. So sometimes I'll show people this sort of diagram where artificial intelligence is really broad. You know, it can encompass something like a little robot vacuum that we have. Some people have going around their house and cleaning for them. And then a subset of artificial intelligence is machine learning. And this is this kind of technique that we use where we, tell computers in advance what it is that we want them to learn. So, for example, I sometimes use this example with dogs. So if we want a computer to be able to identify what a dog is, then we'll, try to give it the features in advance and say, dogs have these features. So they have, they often have like tails and 4 legs and floppy ears and black noses. So we give them the features ahead of time. And then a subset of machine learning is deep learning. And deep learning is this idea where we can make predictions of different things, but we don't give the machine the features, and it just kind of extracts those features automatically. And sort of like a type of deep learning then would be a large language model. And this is what Kevin is talking about, what Erica is talking about when she references ChatGPT. So AI is quite broad, and it can span all of these different things. So I think that's also why we see such a diversity of speakers here on this call, because there's really quite a lot that can be done with AI.
Yeah, it was daunting trying to come up with questions actually for this show, just because there's so many different ways you can ask about AI and apply AI. So
yeah,
I kind of,
in some ways, it would be like doing a talk on like OCD and statistics, right? Like it's just statistics is so broad, it can be used for a lot of different things, and in some ways, AI is like that.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer to never think about statistics if I can help it, but as you know, because you've written papers with me, but I wanted to thank you both for helping kind of ground this conversation in what we're referring to with artificial intelligence. But I think I want to start kind of my more directed questions with what Erica was talking about, which is ChatGPT and generative models, large language models, like you said, Brian, because I know that's what my parents ask about the most frequently. And I want to direct a question specifically at my Stanford people, because you recently wrote a review about artificial intelligence, and there's a lot of stuff about chatbots in there as it applies to OCD. So if you guys would be willing to kind of share what you found in that review of kind of how chatbots are currently being used in the OCD space.
Okay. Great. So maybe I could just give like a 10,000-foot view picture, and then Ji-Young can fill in more details. But I think the reason to write the review is precisely what Kevin and Brian are saying, which is of all of these wonderful tools, we know that OCD causes great distress, and how can we apply all these tools in the ways that can be most helpful, and to also think about a couple threads. And I know, as you mentioned, Greg is interested in ethics, but how do we look at new applications, but in a way that's done ethically, that we keep in mind, that interventions need to be stable over time, so that you need to have test reliability. And if there's a model, if different versions are changing, then can we say something about how helpful one tool is at one point in time and another? How do we deploy AI to be an assistant for people who are giving therapy to individuals who have OCD? How can it be, like, in a sense, an artificial intelligence to help for training and therapy? And also, one thing that wasn't in the review article, but I think is really important, is of all of the applications in academia and our ecosystem, right? What are sort of the ethical principles of writing papers with ChatGPT? How do we review papers? And I'm also deputy editor for American Journal of Psychiatry. So how do we sort of deal with the influx of papers that may have been written, and how do we detect, what is done with ChatGPT and authorship? So it's a very, very big picture. So I think maybe I'll pause there and pass it over to Gian.
So in addition to Caroline's overview of that review paper, for that review paper, we were specifically focusing on large language models and natural language processing, but we try to exclude the machine learning and deep learning based. And there has been a lot of efforts in using deep learning, machine learning based OCD related papers and review papers, meta-analysis a lot using images. But since after we did this literature search, there has been a spike using large language models and natural language processing in the past 2 years. So we wanted to really characterize how people use large language models using those languages, rather than an images and all those the clinical the documents, but patients' languages. How do they use these large language models and natural language processing to the OCD related work? It's very broad and quite in the kind of overview kind of thing, but that's what we found, that people are using now they begin to use large language models, applying the patient's language. So we wanted to characterize those type of work, and we found that quite a lot of work, like social media data, like Twitter, X, and Reddit. Sorry, yeah, I just pull it up.
You're good.
Yeah, yeah, and also we also found not only in the English-based countries, but there are some other countries, not English-based countries. They are trying to use these technologies to analyze patients' languages. So yeah, I believe it will be a lot of studies will be coming out in the next year or two.
Yeah. I mean, thank you both for that summary. When I read the paper, I got the sense that like this is something that like we as clinicians or myself as a patient, like it's coming down the pipeline, and it's something that ought to be thought about, and it's already being applied in a number of ways. I kind of want to ask some clinician focused questions, and this is for my clinicians, Erica, Brian, and Greg, actually, and Carolyn too. Like, how do you guys find AI helpful and incorporating it into your practice?
Erica, do you want to take that? Your whole section on the plenary was on that topic.
Yeah, that's an area that I have gotten very excited about and done a lot of exploring, and so I could definitely talk about that. But what really sold me on AI, they really were my young students were trying to get me to be more AI gung-ho for at least 6 months before I got sold. And what really sold me was seeing how people that I work with, like Gabriel Bach, who runs our AI program at Community West, he was showing me how he was using it, which actually the kids that he works with showed him like a lot of how to do that. So it's actually all coming from the young people that are really open to new ideas and excited. And we've been able to use a lot of their ideas to really give back to the OCD community. So, you know, the AI can give us so many creative ideas for how to present things in engaging ways. It can help us to do teaching with the younger coaches that maybe don't know as much about how to design exposure hierarchies. And, you know, exposure hierarchies are super creative. So being able to do, you know, have a lot of out of the box ideas is really helpful. It can really like reduce a lot of our time in preparing things that are customized to the individual patients. You know, I use it for a lot of my teaching activities too, because I teach a lot of clinicians at UCLA and the associated VA, and I work with all my residents who are learning how to do this. So preparing materials to help people who are just learning ERP how to do that well. So I think there's just so much promise, and it can make me so much more productive. So you really can almost clone me. That'd be my immediate comments, but I'll always have more to say.
And Brian and Greg, if you want to weigh in.
Where I've seen my clients use AI productively is a way to gather resources, right? So we as clinicians have that knowledge. And so for them, it might be something like, hey, I'm struggling with OCD. What are the top organizations and resources that I can lean on? So I've seen my patients use that productively to acquire what they need to then connect with institutions, with researchers, with clinicians to help them get services that they've needed.
I want to follow up on kind of what Erica said really quickly, it took me a minute to think about. You kind of talked about it as like helping to make hierarchies and exposures and train people. I guess my gut reaction there is, how do we know what it's spitting out is good? Like, how do I know that the customized exposure hierarchy is good for that patient? And how do I know that their data is safe if I put it into a model?
Well, I definitely think that's an important thing to emphasize, that this is about really supporting what we do, but not substituting for what we do. So you do need somebody who can vet the output and make sure that it's valid, and that's definitely what we're doing. So I wouldn't want to encourage people to do it on their own without having somebody be able to make sure that it's accurate, because as we know, it's just doing statistical things. It's not always right? So we do have to really give it oversight and make sure it's doing things responsible, especially when we're talking about clinical care. We definitely want to err on the side of safety always.
Yeah, it seems like a difficult tightrope though from the patient perspective to walk, where you have this incredible tool like Greg and you said, where like you can get a lot of information, but then it's hard to know, particularly if you don't come from a clinical background, what's the good bits and what's the bad bits. So if this is for everyone, like how do you parse out if you're a patient, and how would you recommend patients think about using this tool? Anyone can chime in.
Well, I can, oh, go ahead, Greg. I can go after you.
Sure. So my brief comment was, I think it comes back to how we might think about doing research, right? So we want to have reliability with the results that we're finding, reliability, consistency. So I guess what my brain jumps to is, how can they not accept what the output of, how can they not accept the output just automatically and reflexively, right? How can they then verify that? So a good example would be, okay, so ChatGPT or what have you is saying that ERP therapy is a good approach for me. They also are able to identify what are flagship organizations in the space of treating OCD. Okay, IOCDF. What is IOCDF encouraging? ERP-related interventions. So not just taking the output at face value, but trying to check it against multiple sources as well, as you would with popular media or what have you.
Just to add to the point that Greg is making is that, I think just to support research, right? The pace of advances in technology is just really outstripping our ability as researchers to study this more intensively. And I think the traditional, like if you have a drug, you do a randomized clinical trial, doesn't sort of neatly fit into some of the questions that are, in the AI space. So getting creative in terms of how to do clinical studies, making sure that you get good reliability. But I think above all else is like, do no harm, right? So we want to make sure that these technologies aren't, we're really coming in clear-eyed and with equipoise, right? AI could be helpful, but it could also be harmful. And we want to just allow for a clinical trial design to pick up on side effects and to really, really like see, from ideas that we're testing, and Jian can speak a little bit more about one of the studies that we're looking at, early detection and testing models, but using like more vignettes that are de-identified, and then moving that into like protected and closed off LLMs that are disguised using private messages. And you want to kind of really test the road and kick the tires a lot before you then are doing something in a clinical space. And so I think we're a long ways off from that, like just deploying these things clinically, but not too far, because things are really moving quickly. And in other spaces in medicine, things are moving really quickly. So we want our OCD field to be just as fast, but just as mindful and cautious as well.
Mm-hmm. Brian?
Well, I think that there may be three considerations. Is what does artificial intelligence look like in research? What does it look like in a clinician's hands, and what does it look like for patients? And I think that how we want to move forward and the recommendations for those groups are all probably a little different. When I did a review on deep learning and OCD research, one of the things we found was that a lot of the models are based on small sample sizes. They're not very diverse samples. They're going to underrepresent people from more diverse populations. And although right now I think this is very promising in research, I typically don't recommend this to patients because I don't yet have a good handle on whether the pros of using something like ChatGPT outweigh the cons. Now, I think that's a little different than what Erica was talking about before, which is when you have a therapist who is maybe using these tools to streamline some processes, and you have someone who at the end can, has the expertise to evaluate the output. I think that's a little bit different. So I think it's important that maybe we keep these three groups in mind. For me personally, I have a very high bar for what I recommend to patients.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's super helpful to kind of parse the conversation out in that manner of AI in researchers' hands, clinicians' hands, and patients' hands. And Erica, like to your point of helping streamline processes from the clinician's perspective, that makes a ton of sense if you can vet the material. But, I'm someone who goes to treatment, and I'm personally a little bit concerned about, people taking AI recommendations at face value. So Brian, you were talking about being unsure about the pros and cons about ChatGPT or generative models as it relates to patient care, from the patient perspective specifically. And I was wondering if you all could kind of flesh out how you think about the pros and cons from the patient perspective of using this technology to augment their treatment with a clinician. And just because I talk to a lot of people with OCD, I know people are using it almost as a substitute for clinical practices. So if you could all kind of walk me through how you think about the application of this technology from that patient perspective.
I think this is really tricky, right? I think one of the commenters on the stream has brought up this excellent point that our current understanding or our current implementation of AI, large language models, are trained usually in a way that involves human feedback. And especially I know about ChatGPT doing this. If you've ever used it for a long time, you may have encountered a screen that's asking you, which answer do you prefer? It's going to give you two versions of a response, and it's going to ask users to vote on which one they prefer, whatever that means. And OpenAI uses this data to improve their models. So the side effect of this is that models are going to be trained strongly according to human preference. And there was this big outcry a couple of weeks ago about, and indeed in the past couple of months, about ChatGPT, recent versions of it being too sycophantic. It's going to, whenever the user says something, ChatGPT will say whatever it thinks will make the user happy. So for instance, you can suggest something as simple as a cupcake recipe, and ChatGPT will be like, oh my gosh, this is world changing. This cupcake recipe will influence like generations to come. And people actually complain about this because, especially in psychiatry and psychotherapy, my understanding, although definitely not a clinician, I'll leave this to the clinicians. My understanding is that you really shouldn't, as a therapist, be encouraging or sycophantic to your patient. Therapy shouldn't really be about hearing whatever the patient wants to hear. It should be a large portion of it should be about challenging what the patient believes, or it shouldn't necessarily be comfortable all the time. So I think bias within models more generally, and maybe Greg can weigh in on this a little, is a serious concern in terms of what a patient might think about or fail to think about when they're using chatbots as a substitute for therapy. And I think one way that companies like Google are trying to avoid this is by having chatbots cite their sources. If you've ever used Google recently, Google has something called an AI mode, where it will not only produce a chatbot powered response, it will also search through websites to try and substantiate its response by grounding its response in sources from websites that it will cite. So it's not just a chatbot making up, a bunch of information. Supposedly, we'll also have some kind of source citing method, and I think maybe this can go some way towards establishing better trust in AI models. I actually agree with a lot of the current psychiatry consensus that we should be approaching this from a lens of skepticism rather than and especially for patients. I think the idea of patients using this as a substitute is frankly alarming to me personally. And yeah, I'll leave the rest of you guys to fill in a little bit more about the clinician perspective.
I think the challenge is that a lot of first reactions have been like, just ban it, don't use it, check a little box that promises you didn't use it, for at least for us researchers. And I think that's really kind of short-sighted. So it's here, people are going to use it. I'm a child psychiatrist. I'll tell you, kids are going to use it even more if you tell them don't use it. So I think we have to be a lot smarter about how we think about it. And people like the American Psychological Association put out guidelines recently. There's the Common Sense Media, that's a nonprofit that really is thinking hard about this. And so coming together and thinking about how we're going to educate folks in general, but especially our young people, to be really informed users and responsible users, and work with them, just like we encourage teachers and parents to work with young people to learn how to navigate the world safely. This is just another aspect of that. And it can make learning a lot more engaging, and be able to add a lot of cool stuff to help with executive functioning, to help with learning in general. And so I think we don't want to completely turn our backs to these opportunities for enhancing learning and education, but really helping people understand how to use it in a way that reduces harm. And I think absolutely, having regulations on when people are putting things out there that are not responsible, that, there's been all this media about chatbots that have helped people with suicidal things or done really unethical things. And so companies are going to have to be responsible for making sure that their AIs are not doing harm, right?
I just wanted to add a point that maybe combines Kevin's and Erica's, which is, Kevin, I really liked the example, and I saw the article in New York Times, and just to apply it to OCD. So, for example, we know OCD is called the doubting disease, right? And so, could individuals get into the situation where they're looking to ChatGPT for reassurance seeking, right? So that's an example of kind of the negative, and also to Erica's point, which is maybe IOCDF should be at the table with, some of these companies that are developing these things, so they can say hey, we have a lot of literature on accommodation, right? Parental accommodation. So helping parents not help the child do the whatever it is the compulsion is, but having a little bit arm's length. So there isn't a reason why we couldn't use that literature to train models to try and say hey, you've asked me this for the fourth time to reassure you on this. Let's think of another way, or let's think about resources, or just put in questions that could help lead the breadcrumb trail to getting an evaluation from a mental health provider.
I really, really agree about the idea that there should be a multidisciplinary conversation. I think that a lot of parties should be coming to the table to have a nuanced discussion about this. In many ways, this reminds me of when the internet was first blowing up. There's equal parts opportunity and also risk. And it has the potential to really revolutionize a lot of what we do. But I agree about there being a strong need for regulation, Erica. I think there was a law in the EU that recently came into effect, the Artificial Intelligence Act, that stipulates a lot of different regulations on artificial intelligence. And I think in the US, there's been discourse on how it might be too restrictive. for our purposes, but this is the type of conversation that needs to be happening, I think. And parties, authorities in OCD and mental health, the IOCDF, the National Institute of Mental Health, perhaps, everyone needs to be talking to these companies that hold so much power. And this really just reminds me of when Google's search engine was first blowing up. I think OpenAI in many ways stands in the same position. And right now, it's not exactly transparent what parties they might be consulting or who they might be talking to or working with in order to tune their models to better suit health applications.
I want to jump in really quick and I guess kind of move the conversation to, again, what a patient may be seeing, because to Erica's point, I think people are using this. And, Carolyn, you brought up how you could use a chatbot theoretically to accommodate, or Kevin, you brought up that the chatbot's going to tell you what you want to hear. So insofar as patients are kind of already using this, I want to try to identify kind of what biases people who are watching this program should look out for in chatbot responses if they're going to be using them. So kind of what biases might we expect in these chatbots as of now? And for my clinicians, like, how do you caution patients around this?
Yeah, and I think this is where I come down on, like, my caution is I wouldn't use it for patient care. We just don't know enough about this yet for me to feel confident in that recommendation.
But what percent of your patients come to you and tell you that they're already using it?
About half.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that is.
But I think just because.
Speaking of, maybe that's a good group project, guys.
Yeah. I think just because people are using it, though, just because people are using it doesn't necessarily mean that this needs to be endorsed. I mean, a lot of people are on social media, but I'm not necessarily telling people, like, hey, you should jump on TikTok. In fact, I'm usually giving them the opposite advice, right?
I mean, the essence of my question isn't that it should be endorsed. It's more like, I think 50% of people are using it. Given that, like, how do we make sure people use it okay?
We need to talk about it even if we don't endorse it, right? I mean, that's how I feel about genetic testing and cannabis use in patients. So, I mean, if you can't get around what people are doing. So, I mean, I think one thing is you want to make it really open, like make yourself open for discussion of what tell me about the conversations you're having with the chatbot, right? So that at least you know what's going on, because some of this stuff, when they've tested the chatbots to see what they're willing to do, really scary stuff can be going on that nobody's aware of. And I think when you get in this bubble where it's just you and the AI, then you get into trouble, right? So now I think if you can really keep the communication open with their patients, where they can tell you, oh, I'm feeling very close to the chatbot. Here's what it's telling me. Here's what it's doing. I think that gives us an opportunity to be able to help with big picture with our patients. So I think we need to make sure we don't completely shut down that conversation.
I think what we're talking about here ultimately is harm reduction, right? And so while I don't actively encourage my clients to use AI in terms of their treatment, I think what a lot of people turn to AI for, especially when they're seeking behavioral health care, is just good psychoeducation, right? So many people, they're like, I don't understand. I'm not a clinician. I don't, they're saying that for themselves, that they're not a clinician. Like, I just want to understand what's happening to me and how to fix it. And so I think in our role as clinicians, we can take a harm reduction perspective of saying, hey, this is what I would coach you towards. I would coach you towards using AI, generally speaking, for psychoeducation. What are these conditions? What's the history of research tied to them? Who are leading scholars? What are flagship organizations that I can trust for good information? And then I think ultimately, what is really encouraging about AI potentially is I'm thinking about, for my patients, maybe relapse prevention too. So while they're still in treatment with me, coaching them how to use AI for relapse prevention. So when I have patients that they come in, we do good treatment, and they leave and come back, usually what they say is, I didn't know how to I didn't know how to do exposures by myself. I didn't know how to think of new ideas. And so before they would leave treatment with me, I think good harm reduction for AI could be saying, okay, this is how I want you to be using AI to create hierarchies for yourself. And these are interventions that I would encourage you not to do related to potential exposures. So I think just kind of creating more formality related to what we think of as exposures that are not productive or helpful for our patients that AI could potentially generate.
So perhaps I can say, like, as a patient's perspectives, and also perhaps I want to share as a researcher's perspectives, because when the first ChatGPT was out, we evaluated its bias using clinical vignettes that previously tested among those clinicians, and the clinical vignettes that we tested was from 2011 or so, and that paper found like huge bias among clinicians, and we use the same exact vignettes, the same clinical presentations, but only we switch it race, gender, ethnicity, and even social status, like their job. What we found was like the chatbot was biased. They the same exact clinical presentation, but different race, ethnicity. They offer the different diagnosis and different treatment suggestions. That was, but it was like 2 years ago. Perhaps, hopefully, it gets better by now. But that was my first experience of using ChatGPT for my research. Having that in mind, I'm still using chatbots for my research, but I always have those kind of caution. It's not always the correct, and I'm using those information. It looks really looks comprehensive when I use it, like for my research or for my like personal curiosity. It really like well organized. It looks like it offered the link like backed by those kind of link, but then always I'm keeping that lessons in mind, that it could be biased or it could be not necessarily correct. So perhaps it would, for the clinicians, just to just warn the patient that it's okay to I don't know, it's if it's okay to say okay to use. I understand that you use those this technology, but always keep in mind those potential the incorrection of those kind of information.
That's a fascinating research finding, that you can just flip different demographic variables and it'll output a different diagnosis.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like.
Yeah, even clinicians biased. We are human being, right? We make errors and the mistakes, but the chatbot the made at the same it wasn't really like clear to side-by-side comparison, because the humans the evaluations and chatbot evaluations, the mechanisms were a bit different, but then still we saw those kind of still what make me really struck was their job status. That's really shocking. Yeah.
Really interesting. Brian, I want to give you another chance at answering kind of the general question, because I cut you off at first, to clarify my question.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think for me, it's important to clarify that I don't think that we should be shutting down the conversation. So, I created the IOCDF's AI SIG so that we can have these conversations, because I think it's important that everybody, regardless of their background, have a seat at the table and have a voice in this space that's growing quite rapidly. At the same time, when it comes to my recommendations for patients, I like to have this kind of measured response in terms of the evidence out there. And I think Kevin articulated really nicely some of the biases. So for example, ChatGPT can be quite sycophantic. There was a conversation about whether it can actually provide reassurance. And so I think that there's a real risk here that that these systems can also be iatrogenic. For people who don't know what this term means, it means actually
like myself.
And for that reason, I agree with Kevin that I think that there really does have to be a considerable amount of skepticism. In a deep learning review that I did, we found about 10 studies that were predicting either treatment outcomes, classification of OCD, or looking at other aspects of OCD. This is a very, very small literature. For me to recommend to a patient that, it's okay to use these chatbots, but just, mind some of the pitfalls, I don't think that recommendation is aligned with the current research. So I respect that people have different intuitions here. But for me, it's just too new. We just don't know enough about it. We have some studies out there that suggest that patients really like ChatGPT, but then I think there's a good reason to be skeptical about that based on what Kevin is saying, because we might expect that a lot of people really do like chatbots if that's one of the goals of the chatbot, right? If it's not to be challenging, which is one of the central things that we do as therapists. So it's trying to find that response is difficult for me. So when I have these conversations with patients, for me, it's typically along the lines of that I don't recommend that people use ChatGPT when it comes to your clinical care. If you want to know about other things like shoe recommendations, that's one thing. But when it comes to something as important as your clinical care, I think we have to have a higher bar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I strongly agree. Like, I think I honestly run into such trouble squaring the motivations of the companies behind these chatbots and our human health. I think it's OpenAI operate. I don't mean to like single out OpenAI, but they operate as a research laboratory. They are supposedly a nonprofit. So, but yet they sell subscriptions, right? So what is the goal here? And I think it's really tough to kind of know for sure or for certain that when we're using these chatbots, when patients are using these chatbots, what exactly it is that when they interact with when people interact with them, what kind of benefit they're deriving that might or might not be that have their best interests in mind. If they hear what they want to hear and they derive some comfort from that, I think that's great. But tomorrow, maybe we could find out that it could be like Facebook's 2014 social experiment on its users. There was this famous paper in PNAS that came out that produced a huge public outcry. That at the time Facebook was experimenting on its user base without telling anyone. And ostensibly, the research findings were productive, but it really calls into question the ethics under which this research was performed. But that's a different topic. I just think there's potential to really mess up here from the company's perspective.
Well, I just to say and just give a shout out. So at Stanford, we have an AI for Mental Health initiative, and just recently had a speaker, Ashley Golden, who, is talking about a different frameworks for how to assess different kind of apps and see if they're ready for prime time. And also, Shannon Whitsley Sturman and Jane Kim are thinking about frameworks such as the Ready framework and other ones that are basically, how do we as a field, be able to look at the quality of different apps and things like that. So I think in addition to the technology, we need the kind of assessment tool, does this meet the bar, right?
Mm-hmm. There's so many different questions that I want to ask. But I want to pivot to just kind of like a different sort of question line, because I think this would be interesting to people too. I've seen a couple of papers about AI being like a diagnostician or helping identify early markers of someone who may develop symptoms in the future. Brian, I know you did papers too about using deep learning to predict symptomology based on EEG or those sorts of things. So I was wondering if anyone would be willing to talk about, I guess, kind of maybe a less skeptical topic.
Yeah, I can jump in just to say, and I'll pass it over to Jiyoung because she did a really cool paper. So, one of the things that's so heartbreaking to me as a clinician is that it takes on average 14 to 17 years between the time that somebody can have initial symptoms to them getting first line treatments. That's a long time. And so could we use AI to be able to detect symptoms earlier? And so Jiyoung can give you some of the results, but also surprisingly, some things that it couldn't detect too. So, yeah.
Yeah, perhaps this is about our study that came out last year. So we used the different models like generative AI, including ChatGPT and Llama and Gemini models, and using clinical vignettes that tested previously to other mental health professionals and PCPs. The highest diagnostic accuracy was like among those with the psychiatry PhD student trainees. They got over 80% of accuracy, but then PCPs and other APA members less than 70 and 60%. Meanwhile, 3 chatbots showed over 90% of accuracy, and ChatGPT that one was just perfect, 100%.
Wow.
So that was we used clinical vignettes, and now we are moving forward and using this is our ongoing research, and we are using patient messages data. So patients to the healthcare, they use this patient portal. They can send messages to their healthcare team. So we have these longitudinal patient-reported symptoms and issues, and we are using natural language processing plus large language models to, if we can detect key symptoms out of all these large text data.
Yeah.
In our recent study, we found the patient with cardiovascular disease. Among those with cardiovascular disease, we analyzed the patient message data, and we found that the chatbot, it usually in our patient population, it took over 5 years to get diagnosed with comorbid depression. When we used a chatbot using patient message reported symptoms, it was able to detect depression like 1.5 years earlier than the officially charted diagnosed. So we don't want to say that it can detect like 2 years earlier than the official diagnosis. What we want to say is that the chatbots, this technology, had some potential
to pick up on these things.
Yeah, a bit earlier, so that they can get the official, the proper evaluations in the real life setting, in clinical setting, so that they can get the timely care and intervention as needed. So
that's
are
also an incredible finding, that you can just kind of look at chat history and then pick up on indicators of potential psychiatric symptoms brewing.
That's what we're doing right now. That's a good way of using chatbot, but really cautiously. Not solely focusing on and relying on that technology, but we are using that as a methodology. That's one way of we're benefit of those kind of innovative technology.
Yeah, I saw that result earlier this year, that ChatGPT got 100% on those vignettes, and that kind of blew my mind as well. Brian, if you'd want to talk a little bit about EEGs and being able to use deep learning models for more brain-related things.
Yeah, and I think what Jung and Carolyn are describing is pretty consistent with what I found in my review too, is that when it comes to classification accuracy, like diagnostic classification accuracy, not just ChatGPT, but a lot of different types of deep learning models are quite good at making this diagnostic distinction. One thing that I'll say is I was really inspired by the work that they did, and so what we did was we took a lot of our intakes that we had done. These are like full-length intakes that were also verified by a structured clinical interview. And I was interested, and everybody who we did an intake on had OCD. And what I was interested in is, can ChatGPT correctly identify the comorbidities that people have? This is a clinical term meaning the other diagnoses that people have. And it turns out that that ChatGPT was completely unable to do this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it in every instance, it made up more comorbidities than were present. So it was just like, yeah, like you have a comorbidity, you have one, you have one.
Oh, no.
And I think part of the problem too is that, you know, we were using real intakes. And so I find that the research space for this is extremely exciting.
Yeah.
You know, Carolyn and I were talking at IOCDF, and it's funny how a lot of what we work on really dovetails with each other, because despite my skepticism when it comes to patient care, I love to see research in this space. I think we really need it. And I also found high classification accuracy with EEG as well. It was like well over 80%. And that was just 10 people in one group, 10 in another. So like I barely had to try to get that kind of accuracy. So it's really incredible. Yeah, I was going to pass it over to Kevin, but I see we only have a few minutes left because Kevin's actually doing a really cool study with psychiatrists in the loop. And
well, I saw Erica raise her hand too, but just given the time, I think I want to go around and just have everyone say kind of something they'd want someone who's listening to go home with. I say this at the end of almost every one of these that I do. I think we need to do a part 2 at some point. But yeah, I'll start with Kevin, and just if everyone could say some parting wisdom.
Yeah. So if you already use AI, I think that's great. I also use AI myself. And I think the prevailing wisdom that I've really absorbed over the past couple of years, and this extends to more than just therapy, I think in psychiatry, I would not really, I think AI is a great time-saving tool. I would hesitate and exercise some healthy skepticism before trusting it with something that I would not be able to do myself. I think AI is great at accelerating your productivity, but if it's replacing your thinking, or if it's replacing something that you can already that you can't do yourself, that's where I would start to be a little careful. I think if there is a really great quote from the Harry Potter series. Never trust anything if you can't see where it keeps its brain. And that's from the second book for all of my Potter heads out there.
God, quoting Harry Potter directly is such a Yale grad student thing to do.
Oh, please.
Yeah, I am one too, so I get it. But but that's a good quote. Very, I think prescient's a word, right? Yeah. Okay, I'll pass it off to the Stanford people for their final comments.
Can we go?
Yeah, I just agree with Kevin. Just use it as needed for productivity, but don't trust 100%, and don't be too much rely on that. Just you own those kind of tools, so you are the owner, and just don't be just dependent on them too much.
Mine's simple, which is we need more research in the space. So I agree with Brian, and I just really enjoyed talking to Brian at IOCDF, and thank you, Kyle, for organizing this. It's fun in science as a scientist to have like an ongoing like communication with groups, and you see their papers and you're inspired, and Brian, you and your work inspires us and vice versa. And it's just such a beautiful ladder of, working together on these challenging problems, but everyone really, and, when I hear everyone on this panel coming from the heart, wanting to help the OCD community and, wanting to minimize harm. So go research.
Erica.
I see we're out of time, so I'm going to use my time just to plug how exciting this is a time for answers and where the disorders come from and how to treat them, because over the last 20 years we've gathered all this big data that we don't know what to do with, because our brains can't hold all this data and analyze all these patterns, and it's just too overwhelming. In the genetics world, in the electronic medical record world, in imaging, all of these areas are just ready for AI to come in and figure out all the things that we're not smart enough to figure out. So this is going to be a really exciting decade and beyond, using AI to really help us be able to overcome mental illness.
It's exciting and kind of scary as someone who's entering into it. Brian.
Yeah, a lot of people already took the wisdom that I would have given. I think it was really well articulated. So what I'll say is, when I first started my journey into AI and these systems, one of the things that I found the most disappointing when we say that AI learns is that what that really just means is that you have kind of like a lot of different equations, and the weights are updated. So really what this is it's really just math. None of this is magic. And I think sometimes we forget that. Erica said earlier, like, this is statistical. And so I think that this is really what's important. Is I would not really see these as humans. I wouldn't see these as therapists, but these are very sophisticated number crunching machines that have tons of data to work with. And we don't understand them very well. So keep that in mind if you are deciding to use this.
I'm gonna save the best hair for last. No offense, Brian. Greg.
Yeah, so I would say be skeptical, be cautious with what you're feeding into these AI systems, but ultimately it's a message of optimism and hopefulness, right? And I think we're all showing up today with the belief that we can interact with AI systems in a way that's ethical and responsible. And I'm really excited to see how this continues to unfold so that we can reduce suffering, promote joy, and help people get relief from what they're dealing with. And I believe that's possible.
Thank you all for being here. This was a super fun conversation. And I feel like we all spoke together well. I want to shout out Cash in the comment section, who said, Brian is AI. I agree. I've worked with him for 5 years. He's a robot. But thank you everyone for joining, both the panelists and those who are watching at home. And yeah, sorry for going a bit over, and we'll see you next month.